Hello everyone and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Have you ever felt that California hides darker secrets than you could ever imagine? That golden state, full of perfect beaches and Hollywood dreams, also harbors nightmares that will make you question if you really know the place where you live. Today I'm going to tell you 4 real horror stories that happened in California. Stories the media barely mentioned, but that left deep scars on those who lived them. We're not talking about movies or urban legends. These are real experiences from ordinary people who came face to face with pure terror. And I'm warning you now, the 4th story will leave you speechless because what happened to this family in San Francisco defies any logical explanation. But before we begin, if you find value in this type of content, please subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps me keep bringing you stories that really matter. And trust me, after hearing what's coming, you'll want to be ready for the next part. Let's start with the first story, which took place in Los Angeles during the summer of 2019. Story 1. Maria Gonzalez had been saving for 5 years to move into her first apartment. Echo Park seemed perfect, an artsy neighborhood undergoing a renaissance, full of modern coffee shops and art galleries. The apartment she found was a steal, almost too good to be true. A spacious studio in a 1940s building with high ceilings and huge windows facing the street. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Vasquez, seemed eager to rent it out quickly. The first few days were normal. Maria worked as a graphic designer from home, so she spent most of her time in her new space. But it was during the 3rd night that strange things began. At around 2 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the apartment above. Not regular footsteps, but a constant dragging sound, like someone was moving heavy furniture back and forth. At first, she ignored it. Old buildings make noise, she told herself. But the sounds became more frequent and specific. Every night, exactly at 2:15 a.m., the dragging began. It lasted exactly 45 minutes, followed by total silence until the next night. After a week of poor sleep, Maria decided to investigate. She asked Mr. Vasquez about the tenant upstairs. The man's expression changed immediately. He turned pale and looked away before mumbling that the apartment above had been vacant for 6 months. That night, Maria decided to go upstairs. The stairs creaked beneath her feet as she made her way to the 2nd floor. The door to the upper apartment had several locks and a thick layer of dust on the frame. Clearly, no one had been inside for a long time, but that night the sounds continued, louder than ever. Things escalated when Maria began hearing voices, not clear conversations, but constant whispers, as if multiple people were arguing in low tones. The voices seemed to come from the walls themselves, not from the apartment above. She installed an app on her phone to record sounds overnight. What she found the next morning froze her in place. The recording clearly captured 3 distinct voices: a woman crying, a man shouting something unintelligible, and a 3rd voice, the most disturbing of all, a child singing a lullaby in Spanish. But the most chilling part was that the voices didn't come from upstairs. According to the app, they came from inside her own apartment. Maria took the recording to Mr. Vasquez, who finally told her the truth. In 1987, an entire family had died in her apartment. A gas leak had caused a fire that killed the parents and their 8-year-old son. The bodies were found exactly where Maria's bed now stood. The landlord had renovated the apartment several times, but every tenant moved out after a few weeks, always for the same reasons. What Maria didn't know was that she wasn't the first to record the voices. The landlord had a collection of recordings from different tenants, all capturing the same sounds, the same voices, the same lullaby. But there was something else, something Mr. Vasquez had never told anyone. The firefighters who responded to the 1987 fire reported something strange. When they arrived, they heard screams for help coming from inside the apartment. But when they finally broke in, the family had already been dead for hours. The screams continued throughout the rescue operation, even after the bodies were removed. Maria moved out that same week, but the story didn't end there. 2 years later, she got a call from Mr. Vasquez. He told her he had decided to demolish the building. During demolition, the workers found something no one expected. Behind the walls of Maria's apartment, there was a hidden room, a room that didn't appear on any of the building's blueprints. Inside the room, they found personal belongings from the family who died in the fire. The child's toys, photographs, clothes. But they also found something even more disturbing, a journal written by the father, dated 3 days after his death. In it, he described how he was trying to communicate with the living, how he had learned to move objects and make noises to get attention. The last journal entry read, "The new tenant can hear us. Finally, someone can hear us. We won't let her go." Maria never returned to Echo Park, but to this day, every time she passes near that area, she can faintly hear the lullaby the child sang in the recordings. And on some nights, no matter where she is, she can feel that familiar presence dragging furniture above her head. But this first story is only the beginning. What happened in Riverside with the Thompson family makes Maria's experience seem like a fairy tale. Because sometimes the scariest things aren't the ghosts of the past, but what the living are capable of when they think no one is watching. And before we continue with the second story, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed strange sounds in your house? Noises you can't explain? Because after investigating these stories, I've learned that California has a very specific way of keeping its darkest secrets. And what you're about to hear will make you rethink every nighttime sound you've ever heard. The second story takes us to Riverside, where an apparently normal family discovered that their neighbor had been doing something unthinkable for more than 10 years. Story 2. The Thompsons moved to Riverside in March 2020, just as the pandemic was beginning. It was a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood with well-kept gardens and families who had known each other for decades. David and Susan Thompson, along with their 2 teenage children, thought they had found the perfect place to start over after David's divorce and difficult custody battle. The house was perfect, except for one thing they noticed on day 1. Their next-door neighbor, a man in his 60s named Harold Zimmerman, had his windows covered with newspaper and never came out during the day. Susan thought maybe he was shy or worked night shifts. David, being more suspicious by nature, installed security cameras around their property, but aimed them at the street, not at the neighbor's house. During the first few months, everything seemed normal. Harold would occasionally go out at night, always wearing the same dark jacket, always walking toward the same grocery store 3 blocks away. He never spoke to anyone, never made eye contact. The Thompsons would wave when they saw him, but he would just quicken his pace. It was Emma, the 17-year-old daughter, who first noticed something strange. During her virtual classes, which she attended from her second-floor bedroom, she started hearing sounds coming from Harold's backyard. These weren't normal gardening or maintenance sounds. They were metallic, like he was digging with heavy tools, always during the same window of time, from 2 to 5 in the afternoon, when most neighbors were at work. Emma told her parents, but they were too busy adjusting to the new normal of remote work. Besides, digging in your yard isn't exactly a crime. But Emma had a strange feeling about those sounds. They were too regular, too systematic. So she started taking photos from her window. What she saw deeply unsettled her. Harold wasn't digging regular holes. He was digging tunnels. Small entryways that disappeared into the ground, connected by what looked like an entire network spreading beneath his property. But the most disturbing part was that Harold always carried large bags when returning from his nighttime walks. Bags that looked heavy, and that vanished into those tunnels. Emma decided to investigate on her own. One night, while her parents were asleep, she snuck into the backyard and approached the fence separating the 2 properties. What she saw through a small gap in the wood marked her forever. Harold had a full underground tunnel system, lit with LED lights, but these weren't empty tunnels. They were full of things Emma recognized immediately. Posters of missing people she had seen taped to telephone poles over the past few months. Clothing, shoes, handbags, and something else that made her vomit on the spot. There were underground rooms, small cells made of wood and metal. Emma ran back home and woke her parents. At first, they didn't believe her. They thought she had a nightmare. But when Emma showed them the photos she had taken over the past few weeks, David immediately called the police. What investigators uncovered was even worse than what Emma had seen. Harold Zimmerman had been kidnapping people for 12 years. His tunnel system extended not just under his own property, but under neighboring houses, including the Thompsons. He had literally been living beneath them for months. Investigators found evidence of at least 18 victims. Some had escaped years ago, but were never believed when they reported being held in underground tunnels. Others were never found. The tunnels had specific rooms, one for processing, another for storage, and several individual cells where victims were held for weeks or months. But the most chilling discovery was that Harold had been entering the Thompsons' house at night. He had built a tunnel that led directly into their basement. He had photographs of the entire family sleeping, personal items he had stolen, and a detailed diary of their daily routines. In his notes, he described Emma as his next project and had been planning to abduct her during the first week of April. The Thompsons moved out immediately, but the nightmare didn't end there. During the trial, it was revealed that Harold had been doing this in different neighborhoods for decades. He would move every few years, build his tunnel network, and when things got too hot, he would simply vanish and start over somewhere new. The most disturbing part was the testimony from the survivors. They described how Harold would tell them stories about their neighbors, intimate details of their lives, their schedules, their fears. He said he had been watching them for months before acting. Some survivors reported hearing familiar voices in the tunnels, voices of their own neighbors, without realizing that Harold had been recording conversations from underneath their homes. Emma Thompson is now 21 and lives in another state, but she told me something that chilled me to the bone. During the months they lived next to Harold, she had been hearing strange noises in her own home. Sounds coming from the basement, like someone walking below. Her parents always told her it was the pipes or the house settling. Now she knows Harold had been in their house dozens of times. He had stood at the foot of her bed while she slept. He had been in the kitchen while the family ate dinner upstairs. And the most terrifying part, he had been waiting for the perfect moment to take her into his underground world. Harold Zimmerman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But before being sent to prison, he told something to the lead detective on the case. Something that was never made public until now. He said there were other networks, other tunnel systems in different parts of California, and that he wasn't the only one who knew how to build them. Investigators found maps in Harold's house, detailed maps of neighborhoods in San Diego, Sacramento, and Fresno, all marked with the same system of symbols he had used to plan his riverside tunnels. To this day, police continue to investigate properties in those cities, looking for evidence of similar networks. And here comes the most chilling part of all. 3 months after Harold was arrested, Emma received a letter at her new address, an address supposedly known by no one. The letter had no return address but contained a single handwritten line. The tunnels remember. Riverside demolished Harold's house and filled all the tunnels with concrete, but neighbors still report hearing metallic sounds at night, digging noises that seem to come from deep beneath the ground. But if you think this story is disturbing, wait until you hear what happened to the Reyes family in Bakersfield. Because sometimes horror doesn't come from strangers hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it comes from the people we trust most, the ones with keys to our homes and knowledge of our most intimate secrets. The third story will make you question everything you think you know about the people you let into your life. Story 3. The Reyes were a hardworking family from Bakersfield struggling to make ends meet. Roberta worked double shifts in the oil fields, while Anna took care of her sick mother during the day and cleaned offices at night. With 3 young children, 8-year-old Carmen, 5-year-old Miguel, and baby Sophia, just 18 months old, they desperately needed help. It was Anna's sister who recommended Esperanza Morales, a woman in her 40s, single, who had cared for children her entire life. She had impeccable references from families in Fresno and Modesto. She seemed like a gift from heaven when she offered to care for the children for a very reasonable fee. even staying overnight sometimes when Roberto had to work extra shifts. Esperanza fit seamlessly into the family routine. The children adored her, especially Carmen, who started calling her Aunt Espe. She cooked delicious meals, kept the house spotless, and always had creative activities planned for the kids. Ana and Roberto felt blessed to have found her. But after 3 months, Ana began to notice subtle changes in the children's behavior. Carmen, who had always been a cheerful and talkative girl, became quiet and withdrawn. Miguel developed night terrors and started wetting the bed, something he hadn't done in over a year. And baby Sofia would cry uncontrollably whenever Esperanza entered the room. At first, Ana thought the kids were simply adjusting to a new authority figure in their lives. But one night, when she came home early from work because a cleaning job had been canceled, she heard something that chilled her to the bone. Esperanza was in the living room with the children, and Ana could hear her voice clearly from the doorway. But it wasn't the sweet, maternal tone she always used in front of the parents. Her voice was cold, threatening. She was telling Carmen that if she ever told her parents about their special games, something terrible would happen to her family. Ana froze behind the door, trying to process what she had just heard. Esperanza continued speaking, describing in detail how she had taken care of other families that hadn't been obedient. She mentioned names of children, specific addresses, and things she had done to teach lessons to families who hadn't followed her rules. That night after Esperanza left, Ana tried to talk to Carmen, but her daughter became hysterical, begging her not to make Aunt Espe angry. Through tears, Carmen shared fragments of what had been happening. Esperanza had been taking photographs of the children in compromising situations. She had taught them games they were never to mention to their parents, and she had been stealing personal items from the house, including the children's underwear. Ana immediately called Roberto, and together they confronted Esperanza the next day. But she calmly denied everything, suggesting that Carmen was making up stories for attention. She even pulled out her phone and showed messages, supposedly from other families, praising her work and character. But Roberto had installed a hidden camera in the living room after Carmen's disclosure. What that camera captured was even worse than they imagined. Esperanza wasn't just psychologically abusing the children. She had been drugging their food with small doses of sedatives to keep them docile. She had also been inviting strangers into the house, men who paid for private sessions with the children while the parents were at work. The recording showed Esperanza coordinating these visits over the phone, discussing prices and special services. She had turned the Reyes family home into a child exploitation hub, using her position of trust to facilitate the most horrific crimes imaginable. Roberto immediately took the evidence to the police. What they discovered during the investigation was even more disturbing. Esperanza Morales was not her real name. She was actually Magdalena Herrera and had a criminal record in 3 different states. She had been using false identities to get nanny jobs for over 15 years. Investigators uncovered an entire child exploitation network spanning California's Central Valley. Esperanza had been meticulously documenting her crimes, keeping detailed files on every family she had worked for. She had photographs, videos, and written records from more than 40 different families. But the most chilling discovery was that she wasn't acting alone. She had accomplices in different cities, other nannies who used similar methods to infiltrate vulnerable families. They had developed a sophisticated system for identifying target households, parents who worked long hours, low-income families in need of cheap help, and especially immigrant families afraid to contact authorities. During the trial, shocking details came to light. Esperanza had been selling information about families to local criminals, work schedules, security systems, valuables in the home. Several families reported burglaries that happened exactly when she knew they would be away. Testimonies from other victims revealed a terrifying pattern. Esperanza would carefully select the most vulnerable families, gain their complete trust, and then exploit their children. When families started getting suspicious, she would simply disappear and start again in another city under a new name. Carmen Reyes, now 14, is still in therapy. She told me that for months after Esperanza's arrest, she had nightmares where the woman came back to their home, using different names but always with the same cold smile she remembered from those terrible days. Esperanza was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. But before she was transferred, she told the lead detective something that was never made public. She said she had trained other women in her methods, and that the network would continue operating without her. 3 of her accomplices were arrested in the following months, but investigators believe there are more. The FBI opened a federal investigation that remains active to this day. They've identified similar patterns in Nevada, Arizona, and Texas, suggesting the network was much larger than originally thought. Ana Reyes told me something that still haunts me. During the months Esperanza cared for their children, she always seemed to know exactly when they would get home from work, even when their schedules changed unexpectedly. Ana once thought it was maternal intuition, but now she knows Esperanza had been tracking their phones and monitoring their movements. The family moved out of Bakersfield immediately after the trial, but Roberto told me they still receive strange calls at night, calls where no one speaks, but you can hear the sound of children crying in the background before the caller hangs up. And here comes the most disturbing part of all. 6 months after Esperanza was imprisoned, Carmen received a letter in the mail, a letter addressed specifically to her, not to her parents. Inside was a photograph of her sleeping in her new room, in her new house, in her new city. On the back, someone had written, "Special families are never forgotten." Police were never able to trace the origin of that letter, but they increased security around the Reyes family, and to this day they still have occasional police protection. If you think you've heard the worst California has to offer, you're wrong. Because the 4th story, the one that happened in San Francisco, isn't about human criminals. It's about something that defies all logic. Something that made an entire family abandon not just their home, but the entire state. And I'm warning you now, what you're about to hear will change your perspective on what's possible in this world. Because there are things science can't explain, things the police can't arrest, and things that simply shouldn't exist. The 4th story will make you question everything you think you know about reality. Story 4. The Mendoza family had spent their entire lives dreaming of moving to San Francisco. After years of saving every penny, they were finally able to buy a 3-story Victorian house in the Richmond district. It was a historic 1892 home with stunning architectural details and a partial view of the bay from the 3rd floor. For Alejandro and Patricia Mendoza and their 12-year-old twins, Sebastian and Valentina, it was the realization of the American dream. The house had been on the market for 2 years, which should have been a red flag, but the price was incredibly low for San Francisco, and the real estate agent explained that the previous owners had simply decided to move east for family reasons. What they didn't mention was that the house had gone through 7 different owners in the last 15 years, and none had lasted more than 18 months. The first few days were magical. The twins explored every corner of the house, fascinated by the secret passageways and hidden rooms typical of Victorian homes. Patricia eagerly decorated, while Alejandro worked from his new home office, enjoying the quiet neighborhood. But it was Valentina who first noticed something wasn't right. Her room was on the 3rd floor, and from her window she had a perfect view of the backyard. One morning, while getting ready for school, she saw something that left her confused. In the garden stood a woman dressed in period clothing, like she had stepped out of a 19th century photograph. The woman stood completely still, staring directly at Valentina's window. When Valentina blinked and looked again, the woman was gone. She told her parents over breakfast, but they thought it had been a dream or her imagination playing tricks after moving into such an old house. But the sightings became more frequent and more specific. Sebastian started seeing the same figure in different parts of the house, sometimes in the 2nd floor hallway, sometimes in the kitchen, always wearing the same long, dark 19th century dress. The most disturbing part was that the woman never moved. She simply appeared in different places, always staring directly at whoever saw her. Patricia initially dismissed the children's stories as the result of active imaginations, influenced by living in such an old house. But one afternoon, while working on her laptop in the living room, she felt the distinct sensation of being watched. When she looked up, the woman was standing at the bottom of the staircase, staring at her. What disturbed Patricia the most wasn't seeing the apparition. It was the sense of familiarity she felt. The woman didn't look threatening or scary. She looked sad, as if she were trying to communicate something important. Patricia felt a strange compulsion to approach her, but the moment she stood up, the figure vanished. That night, Patricia told Alejandro what she had seen. He had been skeptical of the children's stories, but when his wife described exactly the same figure they had been seeing, he began to take the situation more seriously. They decided to research the house's history. What they discovered left them frozen. In 1924, a woman named Elena Vasquez had lived in the house with her husband and 3 children. One December night, Elena vanished without a trace. Her husband claimed she simply hadn't returned from her usual evening walk around the neighborhood. But police records told a different story. Neighbors had reported hearing screams coming from the house that night. When police investigated, they found signs of a struggle in the living room and blood on the stairs. But they never found Elena's body, and her husband had a solid alibi, having been at a business meeting with multiple witnesses. The case was never solved, and Elena's family eventually moved away. But the record showed something even more disturbing. Since 1924, every family who had lived in the house reported sightings of a woman in period dress. The reports were so consistent that she became known as the Gray Lady of Richmond. The Mendozas thought maybe they could live with a benign ghostly presence. After all, Elena didn't seem threatening, only sad. But things began to escalate in ways they could never have imagined. One night, Alejandro woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of music coming from the first floor. A soft piano melody seemed to drift up from the living room. When he went down to investigate, he found that their upright piano, out of tune since the move, was playing on its own. The keys were pressing themselves down, creating a melancholic melody he'd never heard before. What disturbed him the most wasn't the piano playing by itself. It was that the melody was beautiful and complex. It wasn't random noise or chaotic banging. It was a real composition, played with skill and emotion. Alejandro recorded the melody on his phone and later discovered it was a piece that had been popular in the 1920s. But things truly became terrifying when Elena began interacting physically with the family. Patricia started noticing that items were being moved overnight, not in a destructive way, but organized. Her books were rearranged by publication date, her clothes folded and sorted in specific ways, family photos repositioned at precise angles. The twins began having conversations with Elena. At first, Patricia and Alejandro thought it was an imaginative game, but when they started overhearing the conversations, they realized something more was happening. The children asked specific questions about the house and got detailed answers about secret rooms, hidden passageways, and architectural features they couldn't possibly have known. Elena told them about a hidden passage behind the fireplace that led to the basement. When Alejandro investigated, he indeed found a concealed door leading to a tunnel no inspector had ever mentioned. Elena also warned them about specific plumbing issues, and every prediction came true just as she described. But the most disturbing thing came when Elena started telling them about other family members the children couldn't see. She described an older man who wandered the basement at night, and 2 children who played in the attic. According to Elena, the house was inhabited by spirits of people who had died there over the years. That's when the Mendozas decided to dig deeper into the home's past. What they found terrified them. The house not only had a history of mysterious deaths, it had been built on top of an old cemetery. In 1887, when the house was constructed, the gravestones had been removed, but the bodies left buried. City records showed that at least 15 people had died on the property since 1892. Deaths from illness, accidents, and several suicides. But the most chilling part was learning that Elena had been trying to warn every family about other, more malevolent spirits in the house. Everything changed one night. Sebastian woke up screaming, saying a man had been in his room touching him while he slept. When Patricia ran into his room, she found the windows wide open, despite being on the 3rd floor. The curtains blew violently, even though there was no wind that night. That same night, Alejandro was awakened by the sound of heavy footsteps in the attic. But when he went up to check, he found nothing. Just a freezing temperature with no explanation. His breath was visible in the air, and he could hear whispers coming from the walls. Elena appeared to Patricia that night, but for the first time she looked agitated and urgent. Through gestures and facial expressions, she seemed to be warning the family about something. Patricia felt an overwhelming sense of danger, as if Elena were telling her they needed to leave immediately. The family packed that very night and went to a hotel, but when they returned the next day to retrieve more belongings, they found the house had been completely destroyed from the inside. Furniture overturned, windows shattered, and words scrawled on the walls in what appeared to be blood. The words read, "Elena can't protect you from us." The Mendozas never returned to live in that house. They sold it as is and immediately left California. But before they left, Patricia had one final visit from Elena. The woman appeared in their hotel room looking peaceful for the first time. She handed Patricia an object that hadn't been there before, an old journal. The journal turned out to be Elena Vasquez's, written in 1924. In it, Elena described how she discovered the house had been built on a cemetery and how she tried to protect her family from the malevolent spirits inhabiting the property. The final entry, dated the day of her disappearance, read, "I can't save my family, but maybe I can save the families that come after." Elena had been murdered by her husband, who had been possessed by one of the malevolent spirits. She had spent nearly a century trying to warn and protect the families who lived in her former home, fighting against forces far more powerful than she was. The Mendozas contacted me after reading about my investigation into paranormal stories in California. Patricia told me something that still haunts me. During their final days in the house, she had begun to feel that Elena was not the only benevolent presence there. There was something else, something Elena had been trying to keep at bay. Patricia described a sense that multiple entities inhabited the home, some trying to help and others with far more sinister intentions. The presence Elena had fought for nearly a century was something so malevolent it had corrupted the living, including Elena's husband. The Richmond house still stands, but has been vacant since the Mendozas left. New owners attempted renovations, but workers refused to continue after reporting tools moving on their own, temperatures dropping drastically without reason, and the constant feeling of being watched by something hostile. Sebastian Mendoza, now 18, told me he still dreams of Elena regularly. In his dreams, she's still trying to warn him, pointing toward a specific direction in San Francisco. He believes Elena is trying to tell him there are more houses like theirs, more places where the dead can't rest, and where the living are in danger. And here comes the most chilling part of this story. 3 weeks after the Mendozas left California, Patricia received a phone call from the real estate agent who had sold them the house. The woman was hysterical, saying she had been having nightmares about Elena ever since the Mendozas left. In these dreams, Elena showed her other homes in San Francisco, all with similar histories of unexplained deaths and paranormal activity. The agent had unknowingly been selling cursed properties for years, and Elena had finally found a way to reach her to stop it. The Mendozas never returned to California, but they remain in contact with paranormal investigators in the area. According to the latest reports, the Victorian house in Richmond continues to be a center of unexplainable activity. Neighbors report lights turning on and off by themselves, piano music playing in the middle of the night, and the figure of a woman in period clothing seen standing in the windows. But they also report something more disturbing: darker figures that move around the property at night. Figures that don't seem to share Elena's protective intentions. And so ends our journey through these 4 dark corners of California. 4 stories that remind us that behind the golden beaches and Hollywood dreams, there are realities we'd rather not face. Stories that force us to question what we really know about the places we live and the people we trust. Maria Gonzalez still hears that lullaby when she least expects it. The Thompsons have learned to live knowing danger can literally come from beneath their feet. The Reyes family continues dealing with the consequences of trusting the wrong person. And the Mendozas carry the knowledge that there are forces in this world far beyond our understanding. These aren't just stories meant to scare you in the dark. They're reminders that California, like any place where people live, love, and die, hide secrets sometimes best left buried. But they're also testaments to human resilience, how people find ways to survive even the most terrifying experiences. If these stories impacted you as much as they did me, please share them. Not to scare, but to remember that we must look out for each other, stay alert to signs of danger, and never underestimate the importance of trusting our instincts. And if you have your own real horror story, your own experience that defies explanation, don't hesitate to reach out to me, because these 4 stories are just the tip of the iceberg. California holds many more dark secrets waiting to be told. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes reality is far more terrifying than any fiction we could imagine.